Joining me now here at the Reagan National Economic Forum is Katherine Boyle of A16Z, and it's so good to speak with you again.
It's so good to see you. Thanks for having me.
The last time you and I sat down was actually here at the Defense Forum, I guess about 5-6 months ago.
Yeah.
A lot has changed, and yet not that much has changed since then. And so I kind of want to start there, because at that time we had the presidential election out of the way, and we sort of had a sense of where policy could potentially be headed, and now we're starting to see it roll out. So what does that mean? This intersection of policy, tech, and investment right now from your vantage point?
Yeah, well, I think, that was 5 or 6 months ago, and I think you could say time certainly accelerated, and it feels like it's accelerating, both in business and technology, but also in government. That sort of accelerating force of feeling like things are moving fast has certainly hit Washington. And I think the last time we talked about DOGE, we were talking about it sort of in theory. What is it going to look like? What are some of these, new ideas going to look like? And now we have a better understanding of what they look like. And I think, if I had to summarize the last 6 months, it would be just this extraordinary experimentation that usually exists in startup land. Like, we're used to it as technologists. We see all sorts of new things happening, but really coming to policy and really coming to the Department of Defense. I mean, you and I were talking about the fact that there's just so much change happening inside the Army, inside the department, that wouldn't have been possible a couple years ago. And so to see that culture of change and that culture of doging oneself, of cuts, of making sure that you're spending money in the right way, of innovation really hitting different agencies, I think it's in some ways it's very hopeful for people who are building new technologies who want to work with government.
Today is Elon Musk's last day working with government, working on DOGE. Is that initiative at risk now with him leaving, or no?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that DOGE is not just an institution. I actually think it is a cultural moment. I think it has changed everything about the way that people in Washington do business, the way that industries are changing. I think in some ways it's sort of a permission slip. It's sort of a public playbook that we've talked about in the press, or the press has talked about day in, day out, of managing costs, of managing, getting the most efficiency out of a company. And I think a lot of people who were maybe too scared to do that before, they now see how Elon did it, and they now see how he did it in government, which is probably the hardest place to do it. And so, I do think that the DOD is a perfect example. The Army Transformation Initiative, which is not related to DOGE, but General George coming out and saying, we're going to DOGE ourselves. We're going to cut costs. We're going to make sure that we are the most efficient we can be, that we're bringing in new technology to save the taxpayer money. A lot of people who maybe weren't able to do that because of the culture of Washington and the culture of their company before, I think they now have a permission slip to say, hey, I can come out and say that we need to change things. And I do think we're going to see sort of the spirit of DOGE through a lot of different institutions, not just government.
Sticking with the Army specifically right now, because to your point, I think it is a key test case. What does that do to more quickly modernize the military? And what does it do to bring more startups and players that maybe were sort of not able to break into the Pentagon into the fold now?
Yeah, so I think it's a direct message to them. So it is incredibly impactful to see Secretary Driscoll and General George going on, tech podcasts and talking directly to early stage startups and saying, hey, we want you to build for us. We don't want it to just be the primes that have existed for 100 years. We want technologists to be here. Bringing in engineers actually into the workflow so that they can do testing on these products. I mean, it is so incredible how they're thinking through how they can bring this innovation in as quickly as possible, and then being public about where they haven't been able to. I know that General George has talked very publicly about the Humvee not being something that they need, and yet it's been on their production line for 40 years. And so I think just being a lot more open about the fact that there need to be these changes, and that really the technologists of the future can help. These incredibly mission-oriented, patriotic Silicon Valley engineers, they want to work with the Army, and I think now they have a chance.
So what does that mean for you as a venture investor, and not only a venture investor, but one that helped stand up something called American dynamism, and was very early to this movement that we're now seeing sort of thrust into the mainstream?
Yeah, well, talking about acceleration, I always said, I thought this movement would be a 10-year movement, and that what has happened in the last 3 years has shocked even me, and I'm an optimist. So the fact that there are so many companies building in the national interest, and not just for defense, and things like critical minerals and energy, public safety, anything that really helps government achieve its ends, it really has become there's been an explosion of different types of technology being built for those categories. And defense is certainly one where, I think for a while, a lot of people said the defense category will look more like SpaceX or more like aerospace, where you'll have one key winner and maybe a handful of smaller players. And I think the opposite is happening. There's just been hundreds of companies that have been building for the defense mission. It's allowed the government to pick winners, to say who they want, to say the products they want and the requirements that they want these companies to build for. So I think it's been a boon to the system. It's been a boon for the Department Department of Defense, and then it's also been good for Silicon Valley to learn how to work with government in a fundamental way.
Is there room for everyone?
I think there's room for winners, and not just one winner. And I think you'll see, there's what, 5 primes that command the majority of dollars today. I think you'll see more than that in the future. And not the primes of yesterday, right? Not the 100-year-old companies that have been around for a long time. I think you'll see these new primes developing. And then you'll also see the tier 1 suppliers, the companies that say, we will work with everyone. We'll work with the legacy primes, we're going to work with the new primes, but we're going to be the suppliers to the defense base. And that's where we've been putting a lot of our investment dollars, in these companies that are working with all of the companies that matter to the defense industrial base.
I mean, some of these problems, some of these industries, they're tough problems to crack. I think about critical minerals, for example, or even just starting to stand up supply chains in a more cost-effective and competitive way. What does technology bring to the table now at this moment that enables that maybe didn't exist before?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, one is I think you have a lot of talent that has worked at these vertically integrated companies that understands how to leverage technology, but also that you have to vertically integrate, that you can't remove humans, that you can't just build software. I mean, one of the things that I think used to happen a lot more is if you were building, software from automated factories, you'd want to just bring in the software and do it in sort of the SaaS-like way, and that's just not going to work. You have to vertically integrate, you have to build from the ground up, and you have to use technology and use artificial intelligence in ways that are going to leverage the human labor, that's going to leverage the actual act of what you are building in the physical world. And so that's what I think is interesting about this category is, we're going to talk a lot today, I think, in the forum about how AI is changing everything, but AI has really been a boon to the system because it's actually made humans much more effective in the physical world, and I think that's a very good thing.
So not necessarily displacement of humans, but rather an ability to get them retooled. I think about something like shipbuilding, for example, more quickly.
Yes, and bringing automation to shipbuilding is a great example. Bringing automation so that you can superpower humans who are working on building and actually produce more. When we talk about the number of ships that are built in the U.S., it's an abysmal number compared to China. And so the fact that you can bring automation in and actually leverage the people who are building these things, it just produces more, and of course we need more.
It also gets at another big issue, and that is education, which is very much in focus too. There's a lot of policy movement on that front as well. What needs to happen there to be able to enable that future workforce to realize these missions?
I think that's the question of the minute, right? Like that is the most important question, because education at every level, whether it's early childhood education, how do you teach your children for the next 15 years? It's not the 19th century model that we're used to, or what's happening at public school education. One of the things I have this company that we invested in. I was talking to them a few days ago, and they said we don't need any software engineers. We need chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, physicists, but we don't need any software engineers to do what we're doing. Like, that's going to be a problem solved by AI. And when you hear that, you think, wow, the #1 major across universities is computer science. And so I think we're going to see a huge shift back to these majors and these disciplines that were maybe ignored for the last 50 years. When we talk about the stagnation thesis that no one really wants to be a physicist or a chemist or an aerospace engineer, and that's been a huge problem the last 50 years building for the digital world. I think a lot of education is just going to roar back the other way and go back to we're going to be building in the physical world again.
So if we expand out, what is your assessment of the investing landscape in general right now?
So it is an interesting time. I think everyone is trying to figure out how to leverage AI in their businesses. When I look at venture capital, the 2 areas that I just see the most investment, one is of course anything AI, both at the application layer and the infrastructure layer. But 2, I think that the physical world has become just an extraordinary place to invest as well. And it's been broader than just defense, it's been broader than just products. Again, I think things like mining, energy, these things that used to not have venture dollars attached to them, are very, very boutique firms, are now seeing, I'd say, a lot of interest from sort of what used to be software investors. So I do think that people see that as a massive opportunity, and if you're looking forward the next 10 years, there's just going to be a ton of innovation in those categories.
You've been hearing a lot about uncertainty in the business community, but it does seem like IPOs and even some M&A activity is percolating. Is that your sense?
There could be, yes. I mean, I think limited partners are certainly hopeful that that's what's happening as well.
Great. Katherine Boyle, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.